Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavanscha Shri Upam Sagajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paritana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sata Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Krupa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shrunivari Pashyatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna everyone. So welcome to continued study of Bhagavad Gita. So today we'll be discussing from chapter 13, verse, this is number 20 through 26. This title of this chapter again is Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. So Krishna in this section of this chapter is going to be explaining how the Kshetra comes into existence, what leads to its creation. He's going to explain how nature, Prakriti, and Purusha, the enjoyer, interrelates with the Jiva acquiring this Kshetra. So, in the summary, I guess we can say, of this is that the desire for the Jiva to be the Purusha is what has led to our acquiring a Kshetra. Said differently, our desire to be the enjoyer, independent of Krishna, is the primary reason the Jiva, the spirit soul, we have acquired a material body in this material world. So we'll talk about this cause of the Kshetra Gyan, the Jiva has coming into the Kshetra, right? So this is the discussion for this section. It's very critical, actually, these 7 verses. And one of them will be the seed mantra for the rest of this section of the Bhagavad Gita, the following chapters. So it's a very important concept that we'll discuss. Okay. So the 20th verse reads as follows: Material nature and the living entities should be understood to be beginningless. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. So a couple important points here. That Prakriti, this nature, and the Jiva, they are both eternal. Beginningless means they're eternal. We cannot trace out the origin. So when we say that Prakriti, material nature, is eternal, that rings counter to our understanding, because we know everything in the material world is temporary, right? We said, Krishna said earlier, Dukalayam and Ashashvatam. So yes, the creations within the material world are temporary, and they transform from one to another, just like a clay pot. A clay pot may have a certain life, but at some point it will break. But the materials that went into that clay pot, the earth, it will simply return to earth, and it may remanifest again at a later time. So the creation of that pot is temporary, but the materials are eternal. So like in that way, we can understand that material nature, it is Krishna's inferior energy, and thus it is eternal. It is never lost. It just continues to transform into different forms. And this material energy, Prabhupada writes in the purport, it originates from the Supreme Lord, from Mahavishnu specifically. So actually, when we see about the law of conservation of energy, right, energy is neither created nor destroyed, that is one of the laws in the material world, it actually comes from this, from from the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is saying here that this Prakriti is beginningless. It means it's always there. It's simply transforming. Right? So the Prakriti, that is beginningless. Also the Jiva, the living entity. That's Krishna's energy. Right? So we know that is also eternal. We've learned that from the second chapter, right? Never is there time that I did not exist, nor shall we ever cease to be. Krishna said in the second chapter, 12th verse. So the eternal nature of the Jiva is there. And because it is part of Krishna's energy, it is always going to be eternal. Right? And of course, the Prakriti is part of Krishna's inferior energy, whereas the Jiva is part of Krishna's superior energy. And the super soul is a personal expansion of Krishna, and the Jiva is a separated expansion of Krishna. So we can understand the characteristic of this, because again, some will try to confuse the Jiva and the super soul to be one. They are not. One is a personal expansion of Krishna, the super soul, and the Jiva is a separated expansion. Both made up of Krishna's superior energy, but different in nature. So simultaneously one and different. And we know that the Jiva is also not only beginningless, it's unchangeable. So when we talk about transformations, that's a very important point. But we know the Jiva is unchangeable. Right from the second chapter, Krishna said that the Jiva cannot be cut. It cannot be made wet. It cannot be dried. Nothing can change it. It is eternal. Right? So if the Jiva is unchangeable, then how does it go through transformations? How does the Jiva become contaminated in the material world? That may be a question one asks. So the Jiva is actually never contaminated. It is always pure. But the living entity, the Jiva, becomes covered by contact with the material energy. And thus it becomes embodied or within a kshetra. So the kshetragya, the Jiva, it is always pure, but it becomes embodied by a kshetra. And thus the Jiva identifies with the changes of the body. And thus it experiences changes. But actually the spirit soul is eternally in one state, full of bliss, eternal, and knowledge. Satchit Ananda. Right? So, but out of ignorance, when the Jiva identifies with the body, there is this experience of change. But otherwise we should understand that the Jiva is unchangeable. So when we say that we have become contaminated, remember the soul itself remains always pure. It has just been covered. Just like a diamond pushed into the mud, it becomes contaminated. But the diamond itself is remaining intact. It is simply covered by an outer covering. Similarly, the soul becomes engulfed by the false ego and just acquires this identification with the body. Okay? So the modes of nature that we'll talk about in the next chapter, they apply to the body, not to the Jiva itself. Because the Jiva is Satchitananda. Right? So very important point. Final point in this, that the super soul, now Prabhupada writes that the super soul knows how the individual living entity came into knowledge. He says the Supreme Personality of God knows, however, how and why this actually took place. So, how the living entity came into the material world, Krishna knows. But we do not know, nor is it really relevant when it happened. But the why it happened is really important for us to know. Because then we can undo it. Right? If I don't know why I've been put in jail, I cannot then know how to prevent myself from getting put back into jail. I must know what is it I did. So knowing why is very important. How it happened, not so important. So Prabhupada writes that due to the rebellious nature. So what is the rebellious nature? It says, due to the rebellious nature, we have become conditioned by the material energy. We have come to the material world. So the Jiva is given a chance to enter into Prakriti, this nature, and prepare to again return back to the spiritual world. So what is it that we're rebelling against? Well, the specific rebellion is on this concept of Purusha. So now let's connect all the terms. The Kshetragya has acquired a Kshetra and has entered into Prakriti, due to its desire to be Purusha. Right? So those are four of the terms we've talked about. So the living entity has acquired a body within this material world. That's the jiva, the kshetragya, the kshetra, and the prakriti, due to the desire to be the enjoyer. So Krishna, as we'll see in a later verse, he is the Purusha Paraha, the supreme enjoyer. And so the jiva enters into a body as a Purusha, trying to enjoy the fruits of this body. So we are a limited enjoyer. So due to our desire to try to be independent of Krishna, that's the rebellious nature, we have acquired this body, where the jiva is also a Purusha, but it is a limited Purusha. And thus it's trying to enjoy the limited fruits of this body, of this kshetra. Okay? So when one has knowledge of this kshetragya, the gyeya, the jnana, the Purusha, the prakriti, all these terms, then we can lose our rebellious nature. Once we are ready to serve Krishna, then one is able to enter into the spiritual world, understanding who is the ultimate Purusha. And I'll talk more about this in a few verses. So as we see here, there are pairs, right? There is kshetragya, there are two, soul and supersoul. Gyeya, the object of knowledge, two, soul and supersoul. And Purusha, soul and supersoul. So there are two Purushas, two kshetragyas, and two Gyeyas. So, but they're not one in time. They are distinct, and that Krishna has already established. So now let's continue to talk about the relationship between nature and the jiva. In 21, nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas a living entity is the cause of various sufferings and enjoyment in this world. So, the nature is the cause, or the jiva is the cause? So what is the difference between the changes in material nature and the living entity itself? What's this connection is described here? So who is the cause of suffering and enjoyment? It is the jiva, not nature, prakriti. Nature is not just handing out randomly happiness and distress, right? Or sufferings and enjoyment. It is not happening randomly by nature. It is happening under the cause of the jiva. So let's understand this, that by choosing to associate with matter, embracing Maya, the jiva becomes entangled in the material world and thus receives various boons and punishments based on karmic reactions. So the jiva instigates action by its desires. A kshetra, a field of activities, is awarded to that jiva based on the past activities and desires. That is from the laws of karma. The 8.4 million species of life, they are all creations of the material nature. So the nature is giving the bodies, creating the various bodies, but that is awarded according to the desire and actions of the jiva under the sanction and approval of the supersoul of Krishna. So that is how the three are interconnected. Material nature gives and creates different types of bodies. Thus, they are the cause of all material causes and effects. But how that body is given is based on the jiva's desire and activities and the supersoul's sanction. It is not happening randomly. So all this happens under the control of the supreme Purusha, the supersoul. But the jiva is ultimately responsible and thus owns the result. And the example of the body is given again here as the residential quarters. The type of body we get, the type of residence the jiva gets is based on its karma. So the kshetra is like a limiter to our type of happiness, right? We talked about the pig. The pig cannot enjoy the new iPhone. It doesn't have a body that allows it to enjoy such activity. But the jiva acquires a certain type of residential quarter, a place to stay. It becomes embodied based on its desires. So we are the ultimate cause of our good and bad circumstances. We have no one else to blame. And then we see the tangible results of our past karma is our body. Based on our various desires, we get one of these 8.4 million species of bodies that give us different types of happiness and distress. If you're in the tree body and you want to walk in the park, you cannot do so. Your residential quarter does not allow such activity. That is based on your karma. Right? So the interaction of the jiva and the prakriti is explained herein. Right? So what is the role of nature? I kind of indicated it here a minute ago, but just to explain more clearly, that it is the instrument or the medium to execute the effect. So, when we say nature is the cause of all material cause and effects, it means that it executes the various actions in this world. The jiva itself cannot actually perform any actions. It simply can express desires. And nature carries it out. Just like the activity of moving my arm. I move my hand. I express my desire, but actually the firing of the neurons and all the chemical reactions that happen in the body and the twitch of the muscles to move the hand, that's all carried out by material nature. That's Prakriti. And under whose jurisdiction, again? The Purusha, the Supreme Purusha, the Supersoul. So the nature is creating the different facilities, but again, importantly, not happening randomly. So thus the jiva is the ultimate cause. Everything is facilitated by it. So material nature, one example or a way to think about it is like a pool. Once you jump in the pool, we become wet. So water is the cause of us becoming wet. But we became wet because we decided to jump into the pool. So Prakriti is like that water. The jiva is like that person jumping into the pool. So yes, the water is what's made us wet, but it is our desire that led us to become wet. Right? So everything that happens in that pool, once you're in, is happening through the medium of that water. Right? So once we enter the material world, yes, everything that happens is being executed through Prakriti. So this is the important distinction that Krishna is making in this verse to understand what is our role and what is nature's role in the various things that we experience. Right? So now to kind of expand upon the point I made a little bit in the last verse, this concept of who is the Purusha. Right? So the jiva is fooled by Maya to think that it is the enjoyer and thus tries to enjoy nature. But the real position of the jiva is to be enjoyed by Krishna. So when we try to enjoy ourselves, we end up in this material world. But when we understand that we were created to be enjoyed by Krishna, then one actually experiences unlimited bliss. So to try to enjoy by ourselves will lead to the material world and thus frustration. Because Krishna is the ultimate, the real, the only independent enjoyer. So when we try to enjoy, we're in a false position of trying to be an enjoyer, and thus we come to the material world. And we forget who is the real Purusha. So the real goal of the Jiva and Krishna consciousness is simple. To assist the Jiva in awakening its understanding of who is the real Purusha. The Jiva is meant to assist Krishna in his enjoyment. And when one does, one actually experiences unlimited enjoyment. And that is the conundrum. The more we try to enjoy on our own, the less we enjoy and the more we suffer. The more we try to work to please Krishna, actually the more we then enjoy. And it is the ultimate conundrum that plagues, the living entities in the material world. Searching and searching and searching, trying to enjoy and enjoy and enjoy. It's like a fish trying to be Purusha out of the water. It doesn't happen. You have to put the fish into its natural environment to enjoy. Similar to the living entity, its constitutional position is to serve and give pleasure to Krishna. And when we do, then we actually become an enjoyer. So the question of wanting to enjoy is not in debate. That is absolute. That is the eternal nature of the soul. Because it is made up of ananda, which is happiness. That is the constitutional position of soul, which is to enjoy. It's simply how to find that enjoyment. And so the more we try to be the independent Purusha, then we experience the material world, Prakriti, and try to find some happiness through the Kshetra, and we know we are constantly being slapped here and there in our frustrations of trying to enjoy. But when we realize, through understanding these different topics, how actually there is a Supreme Purusha, and when we come to understand our relationship to that Supreme Purusha, then everything becomes settled and perfect. We'll continue this topic in the next few verses. Now the transmigration of the soul. 22. The living entity in material nature thus follows the way of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. The jiva, this is due to his association with the material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. So how the jiva transmigrates through the various bodies explained in this verse. We heard from second chapter, that the soul is transmigrating body to body. That we saw. But now Krishna is explaining how it happens. So this verse, this 22nd verse, is actually the seed mantra for the rest of this Bhagavad Gita through chapter 17. So the next 4 chapters, 14 through 17, will refer back to this very important verse, this 22nd verse. So why is the jiva here? It is situated within Prakriti, the material nature, because it wants to be Purusha, as we've been saying, the enjoyer. But again, our position is to be enjoyed. So why situated within Prakriti specifically? Because Krishna has arranged an opportunity for us to try to experience enjoyment separate from him. And that circumstance, that situation is Prakriti, material nature. So here we can try to fulfill our desire to dominate, to lord it over material nature. And we can experience the results of that attempt, which is always dukkhalayam, suffering. Maybe some limited enjoyment, but mostly setbacks. And that Prakriti is an opportunity for us to try to, get it out of our system. Try to experience our desire to be the Purusha. And once we realize it doesn't work, then one can go back to the spiritual world. So he creates this inferior material energy for us to try to experience the desire we want, which was to be Purusha. But in reality, we understand we cannot pretend to be the supreme enjoyer. Okay? So, after frustrations of trying to enjoy the creation of material nature, realizing there's nothing here that gives true happiness, then the living entity sees the right way back to its real enjoyment. Again, enjoyment is not in question. It's simply how to find it. So what happens is we take birth after birth after birth. Desires after desires lead us from one body to another. And based on our desires and activities, we get one of these 8.4 million species of life. And thus the soul is transmigrating. So how it happens? Based on our desires. We acquire new and new bodies, different types of residential quarters, different types of kshetras, to try to enjoy the fruits. And the specific body we get is based on our interaction with the modes. And that allows us to enjoy in varying degrees. Prabhupada writes, if you're in the hog body, you get to enjoy stool. Now we get to see just how powerful Maya is. Illusion so strong that we can acquire a body in which it's pleasurable to enjoy stool. That is how powerful illusion is. It's crazy, but it's reality. So long as we think we are master, we'll become under the control of the material nature. Very simple. So we have to try to give up this desire to be the independent Purusha. Then we actually will enjoy by service to Krishna. Otherwise, we'll simply end up suffering in Prakriti and transmigrating through all these bodies. So how to give up this desire, Prabhupada indicates a little bit in the purport. By hearing about the science of Krishna consciousness, as Arjuna is doing. Okay? Then we'll lose this desire to dominate nature That is a long-standing desire. So don't think it'll go away quickly. But it can go away very easily by hearing about this science and practicing Krishna consciousness. So, knowing then that our position is important. So now, Krishna in the 23rd verse is going to explain who is this real Purusha. If we are not the Purusha, the independent Purusha, because we try to be the Purusha, we are suffering within the material world. Well, then who is the Purusha? That becomes very important. So Krishna says, yet in this body there is another transcendental enjoyer. There's another transcendental enjoyer who is experiencing this. Yet in this body there is another transcendental enjoyer who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the super soul. So this is what we hear now. This super soul is the Purusha Paraha. So how is this information helpful? It's very, very important for us, right? That the supreme enjoyer, what happens? Krishna proves first that Paramatma is present in our heart. He's always with us out of his kindness. The Jiva and the super soul are very intimately connected as friends. But the Jiva is rejecting this friendship when it is conditioned by the material world and is trying to enjoy matter separate from the maintainer, from the permitter, from the supreme enjoyer, Paramatma. So we establish here very clearly that the Purusha Paraha is the super soul. Right? So why is the super soul the supreme enjoyer? That is a question one may ask. Well, we know that if you own a house and you have many different facilities in a house, you have a nice boat, you have a big screen TV, you have a pool table, whatever. The owner of that house can be the enjoyer. If somebody comes to visit that house, a friend, that friend who's visiting, they can also enjoy those facilities, but they can enjoy as a secondary enjoyer. Because it is not their facilities. It is not their boat, their pool table, their big screen TV. Making a mundane example. So the friend's ability to enjoy is dependent on the owner's welcoming disposition to allow them to enjoy. It's a very simple example, right? So why are we the dependent enjoyer? Because what facilities we have created to be able to enjoy? Nothing. Krishna is the supreme proprietor. It means he is the owner of everything. And thus he is the supreme controller. He can decide. He can decide. We cannot. Just like the friend cannot independently decide to enjoy those facilities. The owner has to agree. So similarly, Krishna is the supreme proprietor. Right? Aham sarvasya prabhavo. Everything is coming from him. It makes him the supreme enjoyer. So, we brought nothing into this world. We cannot even create a single thing. All we can do is rearrange matter. Everything we become so proud to create, all we are doing is rearranging Prakriti. The clay pot maker. All they're doing is taking water and earth and creating a pot. But they created neither the water nor the earth. So it's simply rearranging matter. So this is what makes us the dependent enjoyer. It doesn't mean we won't enjoy, but we must know how to enjoy. When the friend comes to the house, actually the friend enjoys more. He has unencumbered enjoyment. He is not responsible for any of the things. Something breaks, oh, not my problem. But it must understand its relationship. So similarly, the jiva actually becomes the full enjoyer when he understands that it is Krishna that is the supreme enjoyer that I am fully dependent on. When that happens, everything becomes very sweet. Right? So how does the super soul then interact with the jiva? Right? So the jiva and the super soul are friends. What happens is that the super soul is listening to all of our desires. and it sanctions them. The Supersoul sanctions our desires based on our karma. So he is the permitter. That's why Krishna says he is the overseer and permitter. Even if Krishna does not want us to do a certain action, if it is our desire and we are qualified, Krishna will sanction it. And that's what makes him actually most loving. He never forces our hand. Enter at your own risk. We can enjoy the material world, the material energy, by Krishna's permission. But that is not Krishna's desire. So even if we have a desire separate from Krishna, Krishna will help facilitate our desire. So the jiva actually can do nothing without the sanction of the Supersoul. The Supersoul will direct Prakriti, material nature, to carry out the various desires of the jiva. So the Supersoul is sitting right next to the jiva in the heart and hearing all the desires, and thus sanctions according to what is earned through past actions. So the Supersoul is simply waiting next to the jiva to guide one back home, back to Godhead. We are trying to eat the fruits of the material world, enjoy the kshetra today. As soon as we desire, this is not working, Krishna will begin to instruct from within and engage us in the process of devotional service. We'll see this in a later verse. But remember, the Supersoul will never force our hand. Even though the Supersoul does not want us to express these desires independent of him, if we have them, he will permit them. And that is the ultimate loving nature of the Supreme Lord. Sometimes we wonder, this pesky free will, I wish I didn't have it. I'm not responsible with it. And that is the mood of surrender. And we'll talk about in a few minutes. So, Prabhupada writes at the end of the purport that the jiva is bhukta. It means it is to be enjoyed. It is sustained. And the Supersoul is bhukta, the enjoyer, the maintainer. So we know we have no independent ability to exist, but we want to be independent. We have to remember we are fully maintained by the Supersoul. There's no choice. We came into this world with nothing, so how we can maintain ourselves? We have no facilities to do it on our own. And that is the ego-shattering statement, but that is the eternal reality. And as soon as we begin to accept that, then we actually enjoy as the secondary enjoyer. So understanding our limited position, our ego understands exactly who we are. Otherwise, we'll be deluded by our false ego and try to be the master, the dominant. And thus we can try to enjoy the material world. So Prabhupada writes at the end of this purport a really nice paragraph. It's a little bit long, but it's worth reading. It's really a wonderful purport. He says, the fact is that every individual living entity is eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. And both of them are very intimately related as friends. But the living entity has a tendency to reject the sanction of the Supreme Lord and act independently in an attempt to dominate nature. And because he has this tendency, he is called the marginal energy of the Supreme Lord. The living entity can be situated either in the material energy or in the spiritual energy. As long as he is conditioned by the material energy, the Supreme Lord, as his friend, the Supersoul, stays within him just to get him to return to the spiritual energy. The Lord is always eager to take him back to the spiritual energy. But due to his minute independence, the individual entity is continually rejecting the association of the spiritual light. This misuse of independence is the cause of his material strife in the conditioned nature. The Lord, therefore, is always giving instruction from within and from without. From without, he gives instructions, as stated in Bhagavad Gita. And from within, he tries to convince the living entity that his activities in the material world are not conducive to real happiness. Just give it up and turn your faith toward me. Then you will be happy, he says. Thus, the intelligent person who places faith in the Paramatma, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, begins to advance towards a blissful eternal life of knowledge. this purport is like so comprehensive and conclusive and so beautifully stating our position here in the material world. I feel we should read this daily and just see how sweet the interactions we have with the super soul, how the super soul is trying to get us to give up our immature thought and choose to again reassociate with spiritual energy. And he's helping from within, as super soul, and externally, through Guru, through Shastra, through Sadhu. I can speak for days on that verse, but we'll continue. 24. One who understands his philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position. So what is the result of knowing who is a Purusha? Here it is. It stops us from trying to enjoy separate from Krishna, but gets us to enjoy with Krishna. We stop trying to be the independent Purusha, which is not possible. And thus we break the cycle of birth and death, old age and disease. Stopping the desire to enjoy matter, to enjoy independently, and coming to understand how to enjoy with Krishna. So knowing this, no longer we become materially attached, no more karma, and thus become liberated. This is the very powerful result of this knowledge. When we know Prakriti, this nature, we know the super soul, and we know the Jiva. We know how all three are interrelated. The Jiva, the Kshetragya, the Kshetra, the nature, and the Purusha. When we know these three, everything becomes clear on how to find the best solution. We have to stop looking at Prakriti, nature, as a source of our enjoyment, and look to Super Soul, Krishna, and understanding the Jiva's relationship there, and understanding the faulty relationship with Prakriti. That unlocks the key to everything. Okay? Then we can find eternal happiness in the spiritual world. Otherwise, we'll remain frustrated, trying to enjoy matter, which is never possible for the spirit soul. Remember, spirit does not mix with matter. Kshetragya does not mix with the Kshetra. It is like oil and water. They don't mix. So we understand we fell into this existence due to our desires to enjoy, and we also get out of this existence due to our desires to enjoy with Krishna. We got into it through our desires, and we'll get out of it through our desires. If we desire very, very strongly to become free, the Paramatma from within will inspire, will bring us in association with Guru and saintly personalities, and will show us the way to enter a spiritual world for a blissful eternal life of knowledge, and we'll never return. So our desires got us into this mess, and our desires will get us out. But we have to take knowledge of how to understand what is the best desires to have, and this is the knowledge we are obtaining in this chapter. 25. Some perceive the super soul within themselves through meditation, others through the cultivation of knowledge, and so others through working without fruited desires. So these are three ways to perceive the Gaya, the object of knowledge, the super soul. This is three processes of the search of self-realization. These three, of course, are in addition to bhakti. Once we have bhakti, we've already realized the self. One is acting in self-realization by serving Krishna. So these are three processes that are precursors to bhakti. One is meditation, basically Ashtanga Yoga. Two is cultivation of knowledge. Prabhupada explains this as Sankhya Yoga, primarily analysis and a little bit of meditation. And the third is working without attachment, Nishkam Karma Yoga. Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan explains that this is the primary means of trying to come to the point of self-realization, working in a detached mood. So these are three ways to perceive the super soul, to understand it as we have just been told. And then what is the other way? 26. Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. So here, Krishna is saying, there is another way beyond those three methods previously described in 25. Hearing is a very potent process for advancement. The simple process for the simple people, is simply to hear, surrender to a good source of knowledge. And one can take to the very beneficial process and make great progress. Prabhupada quotes, just hearing the transcendental sound vibrations, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare. Just by hearing that, one can advance extraordinarily fast. One doesn't need to be highly educated even in spiritual matters. Simply good-hearted and humble enough to surrender to the hearing process. Thus we see hearing is, the very important Shravanam, one of the 9 processes of devotional service. It is the first. So Prabhupada quotes, giving up our idea to try to speculate on our own or try to understand from within, but simply hear about Krishna from an authority, then we'll find eternal bliss. So giving up our own endeavors to try to figure this all out and just hear from authority. So key parts of hearing are described. One must hear from a realized soul, a bona fide guru. We cannot hear from anyone. If you're going to hear from a doctor, you want to hear from a bona fide doctor, someone who's licensed, not someone who's just dressed up as a doctor. One must be qualified. So if we're going to hear about these spiritual topics, we should hear from someone who's qualified, a bona fide authority. That is Guru. Coming in, Guru Parampara. And Prabhupada writes very sweetly in the purport, I'm going to quote, one should learn to become the servant of those who are in knowledge of the Supreme Lord. Right? Krishna said earlier, Pariprashnena Sevaya. One should serve the Guru. Why service? That is our reciprocation. That is our payment, our tuition, fees for obtaining this knowledge. Right? We don't go to college for free. So we must render service to the realized souls. And thus they'll become more inspired to share more and more. It brings about the humble disposition within ourselves to then be able to actually receive this knowledge. Because the result of hearing should translate into action. And thus Prabhupada also says, hear from him about self-realization and follow in his footsteps. So hearing is one thing, but then following the directions of what we are hearing is the critical. That is Vigyan, realized knowledge. Okay? So this hearing is just not blind or aimless hearing. We must hear from an authority, from a realized soul. We should render service to that realized soul. And ultimately, we must follow. Hearing is sufficient for beginning, but one must translate into action. Then one will find perfection. So this is the very sweet verses of this 13th chapter that explain our predicament and how we got into it. Our desire to be the Purusha. But when we understand that Krishna is the Purusha Paraha, the supreme enjoyer, then we actually enjoy. Getting out of this conundrum, trying to enjoy ourselves, all we find is suffering. Trying to enjoy with Krishna, all we find is bliss and happiness. So this is the jnana, the knowledge Krishna is revealing in very good detail in this 13th chapter. And thus is why Arjuna asked this question, so it would be revealed to all of us. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Jayananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki. Hare Krishna. Any comments or questions? If there are questions on Zoom, please speak loudly. Somehow my audio is not so loud. Hare Krishna, Dhanavad Pranams.
Yoga, you said one was meditation, one was cultivation of knowledge, the third you said was working in detachment. You gave, you said meditation was jnana yoga?
Ashtanga yoga. Working in knowledge is the Sankhya yoga, and cultivating knowledge is Samkhya Yoga, and working detached is Nishkam Karma Yoga.
Thank you, Bhagavad.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Hare.
Pranam. Thank you so much for always a wonderful class and helping guiding us through such wonderful and complex material. Please forgive me for this question that I have may be unanswerable, unless there's some type of shastric source which you would be want to know. If everything in the spiritual realm is absolute, and we are experiencing perfect bliss there, then, they said, when we fell down, it doesn't really matter. Why we fell down, it does matter. So, what would be the original reason why we would have this? And what's the cause of our envy?
Yeah.
Originally, because if we were perfectly blissful and happy, spiritually there, what would be this defect? Is it that we have free will, so we will eventually experience this type of defect because we have this free will, and we have to be purified by going through this endless samsara to eventually be like, okay, I never want to do that again. I'm perfectly fixed now in this absolute realm. What would be the original reason for this? Is there any type of shastric information on it?
Yeah, Prabhupada is commenting. It's a very common question, but a very difficult question, as he said. So there are certain things we can understand and certain things we cannot, and we have to accept as it is. So you, in essence, actually answered the question in your question, which means you actually understand this well. So the free will is always there, even in the spiritual world. So because of the presence of free will, Prabhupada says, there is the possibility to express this desire to be independent, though one is surrounded by all the perfect situation of the spiritual world. Still, there's the possibility. That possibility is small. So, of all the living entities, those who come to the material world are in a far minority. Most living entities, though they have free will, never are so foolish to express that desire. We are the unfortunate foolish ones. But we are the most fortunate to have somehow now expressed the desire to become unfoolish again. And thus Paramatma sitting within has brought us to Srila Prabhupada and this Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, where we can undo it somewhat very rapidly. So, and as you said, once one experiences devastation and destruction, one never wants to experience it again. Because the concern might be, well, we go back to the spiritual world. What guarantees us that we won't express that free will again to come back? Well, because now we have tasted the misery. Once you have put your hand into a pot of boiling water, intrigued by the bubbles, and realize what happens, you'll never do it again. Even if it looks at it, you'll know. So the living entity, that's why Krishna says throughout Bhagavad Gita, one never returns back having obtained my spiritual abode. He says that repeatedly in Bhagavad Gita. At the end, he says, Ma Suchaha, don't fear. It's not going to happen. Just get back. Get back. So, yes, it can happen. The contamination of thought can happen within the realm of the perfect spiritual world because of the presence of free will. So one who has intelligence understands that I am irresponsible with my free will. And one who has real intelligence, what they do? They surrender their free will to Guru. And they say, Guru, you guide me. Because when I make my own decisions, this is what happens. I have living evidence proof of what happens when I make my own decisions. But that surrendering of free will is also our free will. Right? It's a free will. I can choose to do it or not. It won't be forced upon me. Super soul will never force that upon us. But when I choose to surrender my free will, that is the mood of surrender. We're going to talk a little more about that tonight. And that is the ultimate intelligence. We think, oh, that's foolish. Why would you give up your free will? That's why we're here. That idea. But as soon as we give up our free will and say, Guru, you please guide me, because I don't know, then actually we will find how to truly enjoy. So that's how it happened. Exactly how it happened, we won't know. But the principle is there. Due to free will, it can happen even in the spiritual world. It won't ever happen again, having experienced the torment of material nature. And we can be rest assured. And remember, we are in the minority of those who have expressed that free will to try to be independent, that envy of Krishna. Is that okay?
Hopefully they can see our phone example and they can use it.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much. That was perfect. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, sir.
Hare Krishna. Any other questions or comments?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, are you able to hear me?
Yes, Prabhuji, go ahead. Yes, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. Very nice class. It is theoretical more than practical. My question is like in general, what we understand super soul is as is sitting in the heart of every living entity at the time, just witnessing and approving our actions. But here it is said that he is the second enjoyer sitting at the heart as super soul. This is contradictory. Is this Paramatma also enjoying? The second word is just witnessing, but it's not enjoying. But that's what we can.
Yeah, so the super soul does not enjoy in the material world. But the super soul, Krishna, is the supreme enjoyer. Because he is the supreme proprietor. Just like the owner of the house can be the ultimate enjoyer, Krishna being the owner of everything, everything is coming from him, thus makes him the supreme enjoyer. He is not necessarily enjoying in the material world. He is enjoying always in the spiritual world. He has only one activity in the spiritual world. That's to enjoy with his devotees. So that's his position. But he comes to the material world to be with us, out of his friendship with us. Because he wants to give us again that chance to enjoy as well. So he takes residence in our heart and observes all of our desires. And permits them, sanctions them, and hoping that someday we will turn to him and look for direction back. But he is eternally the supreme enjoyer in the spiritual world. But he has expanded himself as Paramatma to be present within all of us as our friend. Right? So that is the understanding of his position as enjoyer and his position within us as spirit soul. And so, and one kind of just clarification I want to make sure that we walk away from this verses is these verses are technical, but they are very practical. They're actually exacting in the application. So not necessarily theoretical. They are technical. These terms, Shitra, Kshetrigya, Prakriti, Purusha, right, Gaya, and Jnana, they're technical. But they actually unfold the very practical understanding of how we became present within this material world, the circumstance and consciousness that brought us here, and the circumstance and consciousness that will take us back to real enjoyment. So it's extraordinarily practical through the technical terms that Krishna has explained here. And that purport I read from Srila Prabhupada, it's like a beautiful summation of all of that. Very technical knowledge into what I feel is very accessible simple terms, like language, description that we can utilize. And so that's what makes Krishna speaking in this section of Bhagavad Gita, these technical ideas, but they're extraordinarily practical. And that means we actually can achieve success from them. We can put it into action, step by step. And I guess one final comment, we may wonder why this is all needed. Actually, for one who is simply ready to surrender, done. This is for one who needs more details to break through the false ego. One's ready to surrender, then you can say this knowledge isn't required. I don't need to know the Shektar Gyan, the 24 elements and how they interact and how Prakriti and who is just chant and dance and sing and enjoy with Krishna. That's it. But for some of us who are still, searching and need a little bit more, even the detail is given. So the detail is there to fully shatter the false ego. And that is the love of Krishna. Krishna could have simply said, you abandon everything and surrender to me. One line, one verse, Bhagavad Gita could be done. Simply. Sarva dharma parityaja mamikam sharanam vraja. Done. But because we are not ready to surrender so easily, these details are given to help us understand the why, the intricate, exacting science of why we should do it. Yes, we have a question online.
Yes. Does chanting reduce our past karma, or does it just purify our heart of material coverings? When the Guru takes away past karma, how is that different than chanting?
Who's asking?
Laura Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Nice question. So, yes, any devotional service, of which chanting is the most potent, as explained by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, destroys mountains and mountains of past sins. So Krishna says, Aham ton sarva papebhyo. I'll deliver you from all your past sinful reactions. And that is the ultimate love and compassion of Krishna. He says, yes, whatever you've done in the past, mistakes you've made, don't worry. I'll deliver you from all of them by practicing bhakti. That's why he says, Ma suchaha, do not fear, my dear child. Have faith. So yes, chanting destroys mountains and mountains of past sins. And it also, at the same time, purifies the contamination of the heart. It leads to the removal of the anarthas, the impurities, that then allow one to experience the pure and pure bliss of devotional service. Just like if I have a garden and I begin to remove the weeds, the desired plants will grow very nicely. Similarly, as I remove the weeds in the heart, the anarthas in the heart, the desired plant, the tree of bhakti, can grow very nicely. So devotional service and chanting also purifies the heart of all the impurities. So it destroys all of our past sins. One doesn't have to become fearful of all the past activities. Simply take the devotional service. And that's why Krishna says, Ma suchaha, don't fear. So when one surrenders to Guru, why Guru is accepting all of our sins? I mean, it's a very, extraordinary situation. So Guru is accepting all of our sins so that the living entity can become unencumbered by all of that, to make rapid progress to bhakti, back to the spiritual world. Just like if you're walking in the airport and you have 5 or 6 heavy bags, it's very difficult to make progress in your path to wherever you're going. And if someone comes and is ready to take all your bags and you just have to walk unencumbered, how happy we become. That's what the Guru is doing. It's taking all the heavy baggage we have and unencumbering us. Not so that we can acquire more baggage, more sins, but so that we can very quickly return back home, back to Godhead. And so the Guru unencumbers us with this weight Not so that, again, we can acquire more sins, but so that one can very quickly return back. That is the ultimate act of mercy and compassion and love. Who would do that for us? Only the empowered representative of Krishna. Empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead directly. Sakshat Haritvena. Then the Guru will do it. So that is the understanding. So yes, our chanting and our devotional service eradicates our sins. Ultimately surrendering to a spiritual master frees us from our past suffering and past sins. And thus one can make very rapid progress back home, back to Godhead. And that is why Krishna himself said, Tadvidi paripatena pariprashnena sevaya. One must approach a bona fide spiritual master. That is Krishna's instruction, Krishna's guidance, Krishna's recommendation. And what we should do? Pariprashnena sevaya. Render service, inquire submissively. And thus, tattva darshina will see the truth. Because one who has seen the truth can reveal it to us. Thank you for your nice question, Mataji. Any other questions? Okay.
I've got a question.
Yes, Mataji.
The wonderful class actually, really enjoyed listening to this class. One very basic question is coming in mind. I think you must have answered it 100 times before. I don't know, like the super soul that is there in our heart, is guiding us. At the same time, like we always say, right, Krishna will not offer something, he will purify our desires and he will give what is best for us. We keep asking for higher things, but he knows what is good for us and he will purify our desires. At the same time, we are also saying the same thing that he will sanction those desires, even if we have a desire which he doesn't want us to have, but he will still sanction it based on our qualifications, based on our desire and our karma. So I don't know, I'm feeling it's a little bit contradictory that I will keep doing that and this also.
Yeah, no, it's a nice question. So, when we approach Krishna, as he said in the 7th chapter, then Krishna will purify us of those desires. So when we approach Krishna in desires for wealth or freedom from distress or inquisitiveness or curiosity, when we approach Krishna, then he will give based on what is good for us and help us purify. But otherwise, when we express desires, we are indirectly or unknowingly are still approaching Krishna, but we are not overtly approaching Krishna. Then Krishna will sanction those desires according to our qualification. So it's when we go to Krishna, specifically with our desires, then he helps us purify. If we're just expressing our desires, then it is Krishna himself as Super Soul who is hearing them. We may not know that, but that is the fact. And thus, he's going to sanction them according to our qualification. So the difference is between the two is when we approach Krishna with our desires consciously, then that effect occurs. Otherwise, we are simply going to be sanctioned by the Super Soul as permitter. Does that make clear?
Wow, this is so beautiful. This is something very, very exceptional, I would say. So it's so important actually. The prayer that we do to Krishna, that's so important. We feel that we may not be listening, but actually the whole course of our action is being dependent also on that part, right? Purifying, or maybe I'm taking too much of that, but I feel this is like a turning point. I was not aware of these two different courses of action.
Absolutely, it's critical. And that's why Srimad Bhagavatam is simply a compilation of extraordinary prayers by extraordinary personalities. And we learn actually the mood of prayer, how to approach Krishna. Right? We don't know actually how to approach Krishna. So we follow those who do. Yeah, it's a very important. Either way, we are interacting with Super Soul, either knowingly or unknowingly. When we knowingly do, then we actually can make real progress. Otherwise, Krishna will be there, seated as neutral, right? To his devotees, he is partial. To everybody else, he is neutral. He doesn't want to force himself upon us. So, yes, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Prabhuji, one more.
Yes.
This one you were initially explaining, I know maybe technical part and I don't understand too much technical piece. This, first of all, you always have been mentioning Jaya. What is Jaya? I'm not able to understand Jaya.
Yeah, Gaya is the object of knowledge. So what is the object of knowledge? It is the super soul and the soul. They are the object of knowledge as well. So what is it that I'm actually supposed to know? Because by knowing soul and super soul, one then understands that critical relationship that leads to real happiness. So there are two objects of knowledge, just as there are two knowers and there are two Purushas. But one is supreme and one is subordinate.
Okay. Yeah. So two Purushas. One is Supreme Purusha Krishna. One Purusha which is the Jiva, right? Which is supposed to be a dependent one. Independent we act, but we should be a dependent one. Am I correct on that part?
Yeah, because the jiva is also an enjoyer, right? Like just because we say Krishna is a supreme enjoyer, one thinks, oh, that's not fair. He gets to enjoy and we don't. No. The jiva also enjoys because this jiva is part and parcel of Krishna. How we can be part and parcel of Krishna and not have the same nature? So yes, Krishna is the supreme independent enjoyer, but we are also the enjoyer. So the search for enjoyment is right. It's just we're looking in a wrong place. And we know that actually who enjoys more than Krishna actually? His devotees. His devotees actually enjoy so much that Krishna himself wants to experience that happiness. And thus Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appears. That is a whole other topic. But let us not think, oh, Krishna is a supreme enjoyer. It means we are the non-enjoyer. No. We have an enjoying position too. We are also Purusha. But we are the dependent Purusha. Not independent Purusha. Just take two letters out, we're all good. Take out the IN. We're not independent, we are dependent. Simple. Quick change, everything is perfect. But taking those two letters out, that's the hard part. Thus chant nicely.
So Prabhuji, Purusha you have two, Jaya you have two, and what then you said Kshetragya?
Kshetragya, the knower of the field. Right? There's the jiva and the super soul. The super soul is the all-knowing knower. The jiva is the limited knower. Yeah. So where there are pairs, there's always one subordinate and one superior. One superior knower, one subordinate knower, one superior Purusha enjoyer, one subordinate enjoyer, and one superior object of knowledge, one inferior subordinate object of knowledge. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. If not, thank you very much. Next week we'll conclude chapter 13. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta